Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. Now, there is so much hype around emerging technologies that I always try and use this platform to look beyond the buzzwords, demystify the tech, and understand the business value and the tangible results that it can offer. And today, I want to talk about edge computing. And a company called AtlasEdge is rapidly gaining a reputation as a leading pan-European edge data center provider. And they recently appeared on my radar after they announced the acquisition of Datacenter One, a leading German provider for data center development. And when I also learned that the European edge data center platform has over 100 locations across 13 countries, I felt compelled to find out more and also learn more about how their distributed data center portfolio is allowing their customers to plan and shape their technology and network infrastructure to meet those growing requirements for lower latency, higher performance, and localized solutions. And my plan for today is to do all this in a language that everyone can understand. So buckle up and hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to London, where Giuliano Di Vit Antonio, CEO of AtlasEdge, is going to talk about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Thanks for having me, first of all. My name is Giuliano Di Vit Antonio. As my accent betrays, I'm Italian, but I spent most of my life between the US and the UK. I'm the CEO of AtlasEdge, a company that has been in existence for basically a year. We recently celebrated our first birthday. It's a joint venture between Digital Bridge and Liberty Global, two giants in the tech industry that felt that it was an opportunity to launch a new initiative to capture the emerging demand around the edge, and in particular the digital infrastructure that needs to be deployed to serve edge applications. And so AtlasEdge was created, and we assembled a very strong team to take the company into this very exciting chapter.
And one of the things I try and do on this podcast every day is demystify technology and also look beyond the buzzword status. And of course, as soon as we say the words edge computing, a lot of people will think about the hype, and it is an overloaded term in many situations. So how would you define the technology, just to lay any of those myths to rest?
First of all, you're right. It's a very overloaded term. It reminds me a lot of cloud 10, 15 years ago, when cloud came about. It was all sorts of things to all sorts of people. But now, 10, 15 years later, we actually, it's very clear what the cloud is, because it's been adopted and it's helping thousands of enterprises to do their IT. So edge, in its broadest definition, is about deploying compute capacity close to the end user. So they can basically to improve performance, make sure that latency is low. So deploying compute capacity as close as possible to the end user, and that point where you deploy that capacity is the edge. So we refer to edge computing in that respect. However, this point can be in many different locations, because we really look at each customer, each use case, each scenario, and understand where that edge is for that specific application. So we say it's at the edge of the network, but the network is not, in the same place for everybody. So in some cases, that edge could be very close to the end user. Think of an example like the autonomous vehicle, right? That's a very, there's a lot of buzz around the autonomous vehicles. It's something clearly will change our lives. But in that case, I would contend that the edge is going to be the car itself, right? So in that case, it's as close as you can possibly be to the end user, because you can have a lot of compute capacity in the car. And so the edge is going to be the car. In some other cases, it's not going to be that close. It's going to be maybe in close proximity, maybe a couple of miles away. And in some other cases, you deploy just one edge for an entire country, to serve an entire country, which is what a lot of what we call the hyperscalers or the global platforms are doing. So we very much define the edge in terms of how the customers define the edge, and it's very application specific. But in general terms, it's the closest point to where you deploy compute capacity to serve an end user.
And what's fascinating by your definition there is how it is different to each and every customer. And I'm curious, as someone that's right in the heart of this space, and you're talking with businesses and, as you said, even governments around edge computing and what benefits it can offer, what are the trends that you're seeing that are increasing the demand for edge computing and the huge investment taking place for digital infrastructure of this kind right now? Because you must be seeing and hearing a lot, right?
Yes. We talk to all the largest customers in the world. And of course, this is a trend that is very much shaped by the big global platforms, the hyperscalers. They are on a mission to roll out capacity and again, to take it closer and closer to the end users. When some of the big customers landed in Europe roughly a decade ago with their cloud deployments, they were basically in 4 locations in Europe. We refer to them as the flap markets. They would deploy capacity in Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris. In some cases, in Dublin was a 5th choice, but very much a few locations from where they serve all of Europe, right? And since then, they started to put capacity closer and closer to the end users. They have, of course, some massive data centers in the big locations, but they are putting smaller deployments closer and closer and in more and more countries. And we refer to this motion, right? The movement from these centralized locations to more distributed locations as the cloud out motion. It started from the core of the cloud, deploying compute capacity closer and closer to the end users. So that's the cloud out motion, and is very much driving most of the edge deployments today, right? Taking this capacity closer and closer. But we're also seeing the opposite phenomenon. We're seeing many applications that were sitting with the end user. For instance, in an enterprise data center, an on-premise enterprise data center, or even in the home, compute capacity that used to sit there, or in a shop, for instance, that require a little bit more of a resiliency, require a little bit more of an environment where it could be managed in a more proactive fashion. And so these applications are now starting to look for a location close to them, close to an enterprise, or close to an end user, where that edge computing is actually in a more resilient environment. And we refer to this motion as edge in. So you have cloud out, going out from the big clouds closer to the end users. And the other motion you have is edge in, starting from the end user, looking for locations where you can have that resiliency. And the two motions are converging. The two motions are converging into a continuum that goes all the way from the cloud to the edge, with compute capacity distributed across this entire spectrum. And that's where we play. That's where AtlasEdge sits, right? So bringing together those two motions and building data centers in locations that serve the cloud out motion and the edge in motion.
And you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation, we're talking about the similarities between edge computing today and cloud computing 10 years ago, with the ubiquity and the hype that surrounded it. But here in 2022, how does edge computing and cloud work together? Because I suspect there'll be many business leaders listening, and this is the question that they've got at the top of mind right now, right?
Yeah. So what I just described is very much what we refer to as the cloud edge architecture. So it's this continuum, starting at the core with we deploy massive public clouds. We're talking about deployments of 50 to 100 megawatts sitting in these big data centers in the UK. They tend to be in Slough. There are many in Amsterdam. There are many in Frankfurt. These are the big, what we call the core nodes of the cloud. And then you get these smaller and smaller deployments that the users can access for better performance. And in many cases, enterprises have, as I mentioned, deployments close to them. So for the businesses out there, the key question is, where's the best location to deploy my applications? We refer to that as a workload placement. You need to pick the optimal location to deploy your applications, because that's how you improve the performance. That's how you reduce the latency. And ultimately, that's how you reduce cost, because of course, bandwidth is becoming more and more expensive. So workload placement is what enterprises and businesses have to worry about. And they're going to have more and more options. That's the good news, right? In the past, they either deployed on-premise in their own data centers or in these massive clouds in the core of Europe. Now, they have the opportunity to pick many, many more locations where they can deploy their applications. And that's choice. And choice is always a good thing for businesses.
And I'd love to take you back in time just for a brief moment. Is there anything you can share around why AtlasEdge was originally founded and what it was about your offering that made you set out to, I don't know, make yourself a little bit different from all those emerging edge players out there, because it is increasingly becoming a crowded space, but you guys are doing something a little bit different, right?
Well, yes, it is becoming, there's a lot of buzz around the edge. But when it comes to actual data centers that support the edge, there are not many players. There are the biggest players in data center. They are still very much focused on the big, massive data centers that create a huge opportunity in the big markets. And so we are not playing that. That's out of scope for us. We are not going to compete with Digital Realty, with Equinix, with Vantage, with those companies in the big markets. That's not our strategy. Our strategy is to go into the smaller markets. If you think of the UK, for instance, where Manchester is emerging as an alternative to London, as a location where customers want to go for a number of reasons, to do with business, to do with politics, the leveling up agenda, a lot of reasons why enterprises want to go more to the north, serve customers closer closer to their location. And then we see that go to more and more locations in the UK, Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Newcastle, and then Scotland, Wales as well. So you will see this capacity starting to pop up in more and more places. So that's what we're seeing, and a similar motion is happening in Europe. And our mission is to serve more and more of those locations. And today that's happening only at the country level. There are players at the country level that are going, say, in 10, 12 locations across the UK or in 10, 12 locations across Germany, but there is not a pan-European platform. So they're either the big players that are in the big markets, or there are local national players that serve one country. And we really aim to create that type of platform across at least all of Western Europe, and also looking at other countries in Eastern Europe. But the pan-European nature of what we're trying to do is the most important thing. And you may have heard that recently we acquired this company called Datacenter One in Germany. That is our big entry into the German market, because we believe that Germany is one of the countries where edge is going to play out in the most visible way.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask, what was the rationale behind that deal, and which regions do you see as the next frontiers for data center development? Because there's so much happening in this space, and it was something that put you on my radar too.
So actually, let's talk about Germany and then explain how that applies to other countries. Yeah, Germany is very peculiar because today, most of the data center capacity in Germany sits in Frankfurt. It's become a massive, massive hub. There are hundreds and hundreds of megawatts of compute capacity in Frankfurt, from where not only Germany, but most of Central Europe is served. But if you actually look at the GDP of Germany, the population of Germany, very distributed, very distributed. There are many other cities where there's huge manufacturing centers, financial centers like Berlin, like Düsseldorf, Munich, Hamburg, Stuttgart, Hanover, Cologne. There's many cities in Germany that have GDP and have population, and yet they are not really served by the big players in data centers. So it makes a ton of sense for a company to actually distribute their capacity much more. And with the acquisition of Datacenter One, we're hitting exactly those markets, what we call the tier 2 and tier 3 markets in that country. So it's a perfect platform for us to cover the German market beyond Frankfurt, which is the traditional hub. The same thing we've done in the UK. I already mentioned. We are in London, but it's not our focus. Our focus is Manchester and the other cities that we see across the UK that are emerging. And then you can imagine we're going to look at each and every country in Europe. We started with the two largest countries from a GDP and IT spend, but then we're going to look at the other countries in Europe: Benelux, Nordics, France, Southern Europe, my own country, my home country of Italy, and see what are these other locations behind the main capitals where that capacity is going to be required. And that's going to be our strategy to build out the platform.
And the Datacenter One deal, I think it really caps off an incredible year for you, because AtlasEdge recently celebrated your first anniversary. So I've got to ask, what have your key takeaways or learnings as a company been from that first year?
But first of all, I'm very proud of how much we've accomplished in 1 year. Right? Yeah. We are now present in 13 countries across Europe for a company that's 1 year old. It's quite remarkable. So that's really the main takeaway, is that there is demand across the entire continent, and we're here to serve that demand. The other takeaway is that we've noticed that these edge deployments are larger than we anticipated. So we have to build larger data centers than we thought. Some people think that the edge is a small deployment, a couple of racks here and there. No, these edge deployments are actually big. We're talking about entire data halls. We're talking about, in some cases, multi-megawatt deployment. So it's pretty remarkable how big it is already. And so that's why we're so excited that we're actually in a position to serve that market.
And it's often said that the speed of technological change is just moving at such a rapid pace, but equally, there's almost a realization that it's never going to move this slow again. And although you've just celebrated your 1-year anniversary, I'm curious, how are the demands of your customers continuously changing and evolving in that short amount of time? And how are you helping them realize the opportunities that are found at the edge?
Well, listen, we've been through some of the most remarkable times at least in my lifetime, since COVID started. We've seen an acceleration in the adoption of technology. The fact that you and I having this conversation over the internet, now it seems normal, but we don't 3-4 years ago it was not. We would take for granted we're going to meet face to face, and the same happened for most business meetings. Now people work from home, business meeting take place remotely. So it's our lives have changed during COVID and continue to change. So more and more things are done virtually. More and more data is generated. A lot of user generated content. A lot of virtual immersive reality that is emerging. So it's our lives are becoming more and more virtual. I don't know if the metaverse will ever happen in the full embodiment that some envision, where our entire lives are played out in a virtual world. But certainly the trajectory is that more and more things are done digitally, and consequently the amount of data that gets generated is astounding. And that means that there's going to be more and more demand for data centers, and there's going to be more and more demand for digital infrastructure to connect those data centers. So it's very exciting to be in this sector at this specific point in time.
Well, as you said, you've had an incredible first year there, and I would love to get you back on next year and see how things are still continuously evolving. But before I let you go, for anybody listening that wants to take a deep dive into the world of edge computing, beyond the buzzwords and the hype, and find out more information about the kind of work that you're doing, and maybe even contact your team, what's the best starting point for everything AtlasEdge?
AtlasEdge.com, our website. Please visit it. You'll find information about what we do and where we are. And then, of course, there'll be the opportunity to get in touch with the team, and we're available to talk to anybody who wants to know about us. We're always available, talking to customers, talking to people like you in the media, talking to those who have any interest in technology is what we love to do. And so always available to do that.
Well, I meant what I said a few moments ago. I'd love to get you back on next year, because one of the big aims of this podcast is to demystify complex technologies and help businesses see the value and the ROI in it. And I think you've done a beautiful job of that. And I'd love to carry on this conversation. But more than anything, just a big thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Neil. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again next year, and maybe live, face to face, back to the old days. Maybe I'll come to see you in the middle.
Wow, what an incredibly cool guy, and someone that I will be definitely adding to my guys I want to share a beer or a coffee with at some point in the future. And the big standout and the big takeaway for me on this was AtlasEdge is just celebrated its first anniversary and is achieving so much and marching forward, gaining this big reputation. And the entire market is evolving before our very eyes at breakneck speed. And I think to keep up to date with this technology and the work that they're doing, we're going to have to get him on early to mid next year and find out more about how things are taking shape. So hopefully, if you knew nothing about edge computing, hopefully you're a little bit more up to speed with the technology. And but equally, if you're an expert in edge computing, I'd love to hear your insights, the lessons that you've learned. Maybe you've listened to today's podcast and thought, no, Neil, you've missed this, and why didn't you mention that? If that is you right now, don't explode in a bubble of rage. Simply email me or send me a DM. We can share your thoughts on here. I can read them out. Or equally, you can come and sit with me and we'll hear about your experiences too. That's how the podcast works. You've heard from me. You've heard from today's guests. And I invite each and every one of you to share yours too. And you can do any of that by simply emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You get me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, all the usual suspects. Just look for @NeilC.Hughes. But don't just hit follow. Send me a quick message. Tell me you listen to the show, and I'll break the fourth wall and send you a message straight back. And equally, if you've got nothing to say, I cordially invite you to come back again tomorrow, where I've got another guest lined up and another topic about how technology is transforming an industry and maybe even demystifying another technology too. So a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.